Almost 3 years ago to the day, on the 22nd of April 2020, I put out this exact video, looking at the time, the current F1 grid, winding back the clock 7 years and seeing where they were. Well, a lot can change in 3 years, so we're back again. Another 20 drivers. What were they up to 7 years ago? This would be a long one, so get comfortable, get some water, and let's talk about it. The 7-year cut-off date I'm going for is the 10th of April 2016. That's when I started writing the script. So where I can, I'm going to talk about results exactly 7 years ago. If there's not much to go on, then I'll talk about 2016 more generally. So by the 10th of April 2016, we'd had 2 races, the Australian Grand Prix and the Bahrain. You had 11 teams on the grid. Haas were making their debut season. Manor was still in the sport. And it was a season, just like this year, I guess, of one team domination seemingly. Although the scrap between teammates at the front was very interesting. Let's go in championship order from where they all stand this year. Max Verstappen, 18 years old at Toro Rosso. By this stage, 2 races into 2016, he'd already had a complete season in Formula 1, which should be a shock, but isn't a shock. Like, he's still only 25 and he started when he was 17. It's absolute madness. On the 10th of April 2016, he'd have been feeling pretty happy with himself because he had a pretty decent start to the season, and I'm definitely underplaying it there. Did alright in Australia, not bad, but a P6 finish in Bahrain in a Toro Rosso. Fantastic job there. This was slam bang in the middle of his 4-race stint while he remained at Toro Rosso before he ended up getting the call up to Red Bull to replace Daniel Kvyat. And as we all know, Max immediately dispelled any rumours that it wasn't the right call in his first race at Spain, where, thanks to Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg driving into each other, he actually won. Sergio Perez, 26, Force India. It's Checo time, big throwback to the Force India days. This was the start of his 3rd season at the independent minnows that have now evolved to become the Aston Martin Formula 1 team. Unfortunately for Checo, the first 2 rounds in Australia and Bahrain didn't go particularly well. Was outside of the points on both occasions. However, things for the rest of 2016 would improve significantly. This was probably his best season at Force India. Managed 2 P3 podiums at Monaco and Baku. That car clearly had pace. It's just this time 7 years ago, they hadn't quite realised it yet. Fernando Alonso, 34, McLaren. 7 years ago, Fernando was still older than Checo and Valtteri are now. That's insane. But unfortunately for Fernando, at this stage of his career, it wasn't giving him much back. It arguably wasn't really worth it. He was in his 2nd of a 4-year return to McLaren, the team that almost got him the title in 2007. But this was when McLaren were in its middest of periods, and actually at the time, this 2nd year, 2016 McLaren was the strongest of that 4-year stint where he returned, I'd say. But nowhere compared to his old McLaren days, and certainly nowhere compared to his current Aston Martin ones. Now, Fernando did have a very, very memorable start to his 2016 season, and some of you might remember why. It wasn't because of his performance, it was because of what happened in Australia, debut race of the season. He had one of the most iconic shunts in modern Formula 1 history, for sure. Lap 18, heading into the braking zone of turn 3. Esteban Gutierrez ahead in his Haas. Closing speed was big. Fernando caught the back of Esteban's left rear, launched into the air, digging in, barrel roll, really scary shunt. Again, this was pre-Halo days as well. So Fernando was quick to clamber out because he knew his mum would be watching on TV. Fair enough. He would walk away from the accident, but subsequent CT scans suggested that it was too soon for him to return to the car in Bahrain, so Stoffel Van Dorn filled him in, his future McLaren teammate, who actually scored a P10, so Stoffel did a pretty good job. Lewis Hamilton, 31, Mercedes. Going into his 4th year at Mercedes, having won his 2nd title at Mercedes just 4 months prior to this, and his 3rd title overall at the time. But this stage, 4 years ago, things weren't going particularly swimmingly for him, at least by his standards anyway. Mainly because his teammate Nico Rosberg was done playing. Okay, if you remember 2016, Nico Rosberg at the start of the year, 4 wins on the bounce. So the first 2 rounds both went to Nico. Lewis finishing P2 in Australia and then P3 behind Kimi Räikkönen in Bahrain. Even though Lewis put it on pole in Bahrain, he got jumped by Nico at the start, and then Valtteri Bottas, his future teammate in the Williams, bonked him in the back, which lost him loads of momentum at the start, and then Nico took off and looked pretty comfortable in the end. In fact, Lewis wouldn't win in 2016 until round 6 in Monaco. Now, considering he only missed out on the title by 5 points, you got to say that this early season struggle to get on pace certainly contributed to him not winning this championship. Also, by this stage 7 years ago, we were still ahead of the Catalunya meltdown between the two of them. That was still drama waiting to unfold. Carlos Sainz, 21, Toro Rosso. Having made his F1 debut the season prior at 20 years old, this was Carlos's second season at Toro Rosso, also alongside Max Verstappen for the second time. Australia did very well. First race of the season, P9 finish, was ahead of Max in P10. However, Bahrain wouldn't go quite so well for him. Again, Max finished that race P6, whereas Carlos got a lap 1 tangle with Checo, damage that would result in his Bahrain Grand Prix ending early. At this stage of his career, Carlos was doing okay. Again, he was in a very bang average Toro Rosso, but like we've seen so many times, Max Verstappen was making him look pretty mediocre. He wasn't doing bad enough of a job to deserve getting dropped by any stretch of the imagination, but he wasn't reaching the heights of Max Verstappen. It must have been a frustrating time for him. He must have been hungry for more, surely. Oh, I'm hungry actually. I'm hungry too. Well, it's a good thing today's video sponsor is HelloFresh. See, HelloFresh takes the absolute faff out of home cooking, putting everything you need together in a box, delivered straight to your door. One of my biggest pet peeves in the world, for sure, is food waste. It does my absolute head in. It's grim as a society how much we just throw away, but with HelloFresh, and it's all pre-portioned, it's all there, all the ingredients you need. None of it needs to go in the bin. You don't need to buy some fancy ingredients that sit in the cupboard for a week and you have to chuck it out because it's gone off. It's lean, it's clean, bellissimo. Let's go take a look, because my box with 5 meals in has just arrived. So let's go and see. HelloFresh. HelloFresh. So what's in the box? Well, as if by magic, 5 meals. Oh, cop that. Look, so easy, mate. So simple. Hannah's out at the minute, but I can't wait till she gets back already because I'm hungry. We ended up going for the spiced tofu rice bowl with garlic, tender stem broccoli and pickled carrot, ribbons, mint, and help me prep it all. Look at him, he's so cute. This came out absolutely beautiful. Look at that. I know you're interested. Use the link in my description or go to hellofresh.com and use the code POGTOMMO APR50 for 50% off, plus your first box ships completely free of charge. Lance Stroll, 17, 24 Hours of Daytona and F3 European. First driver to not be in F1 7 years ago, it was Lance Stroll, who was just 17 at the time. How is Lance Stroll 24? He feels like he's been in F1 forever. Thank you, Daddy's cash. But anyway, he started 2016 with a big event already ticked off. 2016 24 Hours of Daytona alongside Brendan Hartley, who Max Verstappen was cosplaying in Australia. 10 years of F1 experience, Alex Wirtz, and BTCC legend Andy Priaulx. Driving for Chip Ganassi Racing in this horrific prototype Ford EcoBoost. Look at that car. It's just so dead. It's awful. And unfortunately, it was also slow because they qualified P5, finished P5 in the end, 11 laps down from the eventual race winners in prototype class anyway. But then back to Formula Cars. By the 10th of April 2016, Lance had completed the first 2 rounds of the season, not just Lance, everyone in the championship obviously, both at Le Castellet in France, and went pretty well. Amongst a stacked grid as well, you had George Russell, Zhou Guanyu, Nick Cassidy, Max Günther and Callum Ilott, just to name a few. Round 1 was Bliss, he poled it, got fastest lap and won the race. Round 2, DNF'd. But it didn't matter in the end. Lance ended up walking away with this championship in 2016. He beat P2, Maxi Günther, by 173 points. He was 243 points clear of George Russell. How much of this was Prema tax is entirely up to you to decide, I suppose. George Russell, 18, F3 European. They are P6 and 7 in the current championship standings, and they were doing the same thing this time 7 years ago. And actually, you know what? Round 1, George put it P3. Round 2, he was P11 out the points. So again, Lance and George both had pretty balanced weekends, actually. He was driving for High Tech at the time, which certainly isn't a team with the clout of Prema, right? But when you bear in mind George's teammates finished P9 and P20 respectively in exactly the same hardware, he did a very good job. Lando Norris, 16, Just loads of things. Nozza was a busy boy in 2016, at just 16 years of age though, so he was still only a child, quite literally. And this was the first season he'd really flex his talent in open wheelers. So, Formula Renault Eurocup 2.0, teammates with Jehan Daruvala and Robert Schwartzman. At the first event in Aragon in Spain, with 3 rounds, he won 2 and P2'd in the other one. Now, these didn't technically happen till the 16th, 17th of April. It's therefore technically less than 7 years ago, but I don't care. Lando would go on to win that championship by over 50 points in the end. Simultaneously, in the same car, he was doing the Formula Renault 2.0 Northern European Cup with 6 wins in 15 rounds, also taking the victory. And finally, Joshua Revelino's favourite series of them all, the Toyota Racing Series. I'll let him take it away, shall I? He'll do a better job than me.
The 2016 Toyota Racing Series. It's a glorified boot camp for rich teenagers, but for us peasants, we're excited. We're seeing a lot of F1 Academy drivers venture to this part of the world, with last year's championship being won by Sir Lancelot. The championship's top team, M2 Competition, had a stacked driver lineup this year. Pedro Piquet, Jehan Daruvala, Zhou Guanyu, and, of course, Lando Norris. Lando had come in with the biggest wave of hype, and boy, would not miss. In the 10 qualifying sessions throughout that series, he took pole position in 8 of them, which is a lot. He took wins in every single round that year, with his weekend in Taupo being particularly dominant. His consistency was bananas, only ever finishing outside the top 10 once, and all these fantastic results sent him on to a comfortable win in the overall standings. But it wouldn't just end there, wouldn't it? He had to show everyone who was boss. The last race in that series was the prestigious New Zealand Grand Prix. He won in relative comfort over Markelov and set himself up for the European season and the road to Formula 1.
A third championship win to boot in 2016, and actually at the end of the year, it's funny we talked about Lance and George in F3 European. Well, Lando did a few races right at the end of the season. One event, Hockenheim, with 3 rounds. Unfortunately, he was only able to manage a DNF and 2 P16, so it didn't go particularly well, but clearly his talent had been proven over the course of this season. Nico Hulkenberg, 28, Force India. 16 was Nico's final season at Force India. He'd actually go on in 2016 to get outscored by Checo for the 2nd season in a row, and would opt at the end of the year to move to Renault to replace the outgoing Kevin Magnussen, who'd moved to Haas. Australian Grand Prix, round 1, played out pretty well actually for Nico. P10 in qualifying, fractionally behind Sergio, but then made his way up to P7 in the race. Bahrain started well as well. He got into Q3, snuck into P8. At the time, only the top 8 got into Q3. But then in the race, he lost out big time. Lap 1 contact, put him down the order, finished P15 in the end. 2016 isn't a season I think Nico Hulkenberg looks back on memorably, you know. Charles Leclerc, 18, GP3. How the f*** is Charles Leclerc this low on this list? How is he 10th in the driver's standings? That's actually barbaric. An 18-year-old Charles Marc Hervé Percival Leclerc, did I miss any? Was plying his trade in 2016 in GP3, the series that is now Formula 3. And his teammates at ART is pretty stacked. So he had current Super Formula driver Nore Fukuzumi, F1 rookie Nick de Vries, and of course, Alex Albon. Always getting a mention, isn't he? You had Alex Palou in the Campos, you had Jake Dennis in an Arden, you had Antonio Fuoco in a Trident, yet Charles was able to overcome all, took 3 wins, 8 podiums in 18 rounds total. Apparently there were rumours after he took this championship that he might get a Haas seat for 2017, because at the time he was also doing Haas testing, did FP1 at the British and German Grand Prix for Haas. So as a Haas development driver, as a Ferrari driver academy member as well, there was that opportunity, but apparently Günther turned it down, which in hindsight, I mean, I guess it wouldn't have made a massive difference because he would have got the call up to Ferrari anyway, but that's a bit of an L from Günther there, turning down Charles. Valtteri Bottas, 2016 Williams. This time 7 years ago, Valtteri was just starting his 3rd season at Williams, alongside Felipe Massa as his teammate. Both had strong starts to the year. Valtteri managed a P8 in Australia and a P9 at Bahrain. He'd also get a podium at Canada just a few rounds after this, which was his last podium ever at Williams. Impressive consistency throughout the season. He only finished 6 out of 21 races outside of the points in 2016. And in the end, it was the impressiveness of these performances that got him the call up to Mercedes, because of course Nico Hulkenberg retired at the end of the season. Then Mercedes needed a driver to fill his seat, so then they saw Bottas and was like, oh, here you go, have 10 million and we'll take him. And that's what happened for 2017. And it was nothing less than deserved. He was the right driver for that seat, quite clearly, going on by what Mercedes went on to achieve in these subsequent years. Esteban Ocon, 19, Mana. Esteban's 2016 was an interesting one because this time, 7 years ago, so 10th of April 2016, he did not have an F1 seat, yet he would end the year with one. Wind the clock back a couple more years, and in 2014, Esteban had won FIA European F3, with Verstappen just finishing third. However, Verstappen got the call up, made the move to Toro Rosso. Esteban went into GP3 for 2015, won that as well. Yet goes to 2016 and there's no seat. He had to settle for a Renault development reserve driver role. He took part in 4 FP1s over the course of the season, helped, I guess, by having Toto Wolff as his manager at the time, but the opportunity didn't open itself up until it did, because on the 10th of August 2016, so exactly 4 months in the future from our cut-off date, Mana driver Rio Haryanto had basically lost funding. The sponsors weren't coughing up, so he was dropped, and then Toto was like, go on Esteban, that's a Mercedes-powered team. Get in there, my son. Mana was a definition of backmarker back then. He was alongside Pascal Wehrlein as a teammate, and probably the highlight was Brazil, where he finished P12 in the rain, which is always a challenge. Oscar Piastri, 15, F4 UAE. 7 years ago, Oscar Piastri was literally a child. If you go back 8 years, he was a grid kid for Daniel Kvyat at the 2015 Australian Grand Prix. Yet now he's in F1 7 years later. It's actually mad. 2016, he spent most of it in a car, actually, in 6 OK Junior class championships. There were no title wins at all. In fact, a P8 in the WSK Final Cup and a P6 in the CIK FIA World Championship were the highlights. Very good, but nothing groundbreaking. But then he would also make his Formula Open Wheel debut in 2016 at F4 UAE. Racing for the Dragon F14, the season wouldn't start till like October 2016. Field was pretty sparse as well, just around the Dubai Autodrome and Yas Marina. You know, if you thought Hamver Bot was a boring podium, you ain't seen nothing yet. Aberdeen, Sargent and Babington, these three, P1, 2 and 3, almost every single week. Oscar got a couple of P3s, but mainly was on the fringes. At this time, certainly 7 years ago, I think it's fair to say there was little to suggest that Oscar would become the driver that he is today. Pierre Gasly, 20, GP2. 2016 was a huge year for Pierre in junior categories, his final year in junior categories before he'd eventually get a call up late into 2017. Exactly 7 years ago today, I don't know what he was doing because the GP2 season didn't start until May. The year prior, he'd done a solid job at Dams, P8 in the end, nothing terrible, nothing fantastic, but he needed more. Moved to Prema for 2016, a team who were also making their debut in GP2, and neither of them disappointed by any stretch of the imagination. Pierre won 4 times that season, 9 podiums in total from 22 rounds, won the championship by 8 points ahead of his Prema teammate, Antonio Giovinazzi. Zhou Guanyu, 16, F3 European. Just like Lance and George, Zhou was plying his trade in F3 European 7 years ago. But he was just 16, he was younger than both of them. Still is, obviously, that's how age works. Le Castellet, Zhou started with a P14, so a bit of a stinker right at the start, but then managed a P3 podium in round 2, and then back down to P8. So a very mixed bag for Zhou. He'd actually finished the championship P13 overall. Not very good. There were a bunch of weekends. You had Pau, Zandvoort and the Nürburgring where he scored nil points in all 3 races, which really curtailed his attempts to win, whereas Lance won pretty much every race in the second half of the season. But also, just as Lando did, Zhou jumped into the Toyota Racing Series at the start of 2016. He wasn't anywhere near as successful, but he did manage a win. 1 round, Hampton Downs. 3 P3s over the rest of the year as well. Managed P6 in the end, which 19 full-time runners, so pretty good. Yuki Tsunoda, 15, F4 Japanese. 2016 was Yuki's first year in junior Formula cars, having competed in the Japanese JAF karting championship prior to this. Dates are difficult to come by on this stuff, but I'm just going to look at 2016 more broadly for him. In 2016, he graduated from the Honda Suzuka Racing School, the HRS. He also joined Honda's Formula Dream project in 2016, which is a logo you still see on the AlphaTauri to this day. Yuki's single-seater debut was a one-off appearance in F4 Japanese at Suzuka, and bear in mind, right, 48 individual drivers did at least 1 round, including Yuki, of this season, and there were 26 full-time drivers, okay? Baby Yuki rocks up, round 1, P2. Round 2, P4. At least 27 drivers on the grids, and he does that. Worldy. Kevin Magnussen, 23, Renault. In 2015, Magnussen was on the sidelines at McLaren, having been replaced by Fernando Alonso, so ahead of 2016, he made arguably the most forgettable F1 transfer of all time when he went to Renault. I guarantee a bunch of you didn't know that. First 2 rounds would have been a tad frustrating. He finished P12 in Australia and P11 in Bahrain. Decent, but not in the points. And 2016 would actually only see Kevin achieve 2 point scoring finishes all season. Teammate Jolyon Palmer got 1, and he literally got 1 point from it. Kevin at least got a P7 in Russia. No wonder he jumped ship for Haas in 2017, although the 2017 Renault was better than the 2017 Haas. But at the time, in 2016, that Renault was awful. How a manufacturer could bring that kind of barge to F1 was embarrassing, to be honest. Alex Albon, 20, GP3. The main event, 20-year-old Alex Albon is here. It's okay, everyone. In GP3, alongside, again, previously mentioned, Charles Leclerc and Nyck de Vries as AR teammates. Alex managed 4 wins, 1 more than Charles. I'm just saying. I'm not saying he's better than Charles, I'm just saying. But he couldn't match the Monegasque driver's consistency. He only had 1 fewer podium than Charles that year, but 1 more retirement in the season and just generally more culpable to a stinker. Alex finished P2 in the end, 25 points behind Charles and 20 clear of Antonio Fuoco up the Albon. Logan Sargeant, 15, F4 UAE. In case you didn't already know, Logan Sargeant in a kart was a bit of a god. Consistently top 5 in almost every series he entered, winning a bunch, especially in 2015. 2016 was still good though. He won the OK class in the WSK Champions Cup, P4'd it in the WSK Supermaster Series, and P5'd the CIK FIA European Championship. And like I mentioned in Oscar's section, Sargeant also did F4 UAE, and he was the Verstappen in the Hamverbot, but he was the one in the middle finishing P2 all the time, basically. That's what I'm trying to say, but not very well. At this stage, if you looked at both of them, you would say clearly Logan was showing way more potential. It's funny, isn't it, how the trajectories of their careers, even, Formula 3 in 2020, they were pretty much on par, yet they kind of branched off and now they've come back together again. I find that really fascinating. Nyck de Vries, 21, GP3. The final driver on this list, Nyck de Vries, lined up alongside Charles Leclerc and Alex Albon, GP3, ART, blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, Nyck wasn't quite able to hit the heights of them two in that season. It wasn't bad by any stretch. He won 2 races, had a P2 and a couple of P3s to his name, was 44 points off of Alex in the end though, and 69, nice, off of Charles. He did enough to earn him promotion to F2 in 2017 anyway. I guess I'll see you again in 3 years when I do this video once again. Maybe I'll have a proper job by then. I guess we'll see. Shout out HelloFresh again for sponsoring this one. Make sure you use this code while you still can. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.